Today is Wednesday, September 23, 2015, and we are here today to interview Sister Brigid Johnson about her sister, her natural sister, Sister Canice Johnson. If you can tell us, do you know, we would like to know about her journey of faith. What led her to the religious life?
Well, I think it was actually similar for both of us. She went to Mercy High School, right? And the Sisters of Mercy, this was back in the early 50s, and there were many sisters teaching in the school, so she got to know them very well. They were around much of the time. And she was very attracted by the friendliness, the warmth. They were good teachers, and they were fun. They were fun people. It was fun seeing them together, taking walks after school or before school. We'd see them in the chapel praying by themselves or together as a group, and it was just a very attractive form of life, and she wanted to be like that and wanted to do for others what those sisters had done for her. So I think that was the big attraction.
Did she go into right from high school?
Yes, she entered right after graduation.
Right after graduation.
Well, a few months after.
Our next question is, why did she choose the Sisters of Mercy as opposed to another religious order?
Well, she did have, she went to St. Francis de Sales grade school. There was another community of sisters there, but and then went to Mercy High School where there were Sisters of Mercy. There was a very big difference between probably the opportunities of being with the sisters between grade school and high school. Once she got into high school, there were many activities after school and before school. It was just a whole different way of relating. So, and I think perhaps the community that was teaching in the grade school at the time was much more strict and severe. They never, it seemed like they never smiled or talked. We'd see them walking when we went to church. They would be walking single file. They never walked together. So it was just a very different feeling. I think that has changed tremendously in that community as well. But it was just a very big difference.
I remember in my grade school we had 48 students. You had to be a little bit more severe.
Oh, yes.
You know, when
yes,
you had that many.
That's possible.
Right. So what was the focus of her education as a student at Mercy College?
Well, she majored in English and education, of course. So that was the primary focus. And then went on for her master's degree in English, and then finally, a few years later, for her PhD in linguistics. So that was the primary focus all the way through.
Linguistics. What was her role? What was Canice's role at Mercy College?
She taught English, and then was, after just a couple of years of teaching, was chair of the Department of English for a few years until the community asked her to go to start on her PhD.
And where did she get that?
She went to the University of Texas in Austin for that.
Oh, it's a long way from home.
It was.
So were you at Mercy College of Detroit at the same time that Sister Canice was?
Yes, I was 2 years behind Canice in school and entered also right after graduation from high school. So I was there. She was a novice when I entered. I was a postulant. At the time, our rules were very strict in the convent as opposed to the sisters at the high school. And so we actually didn't talk a lot. Couldn't, because she was a novice, senior novice, and I was a postulant. So the rules were very circumscribed. What was the question?
Well,
was I there?
Yeah,
I was
were
there.
you there? So
I was there.
So
I would see her.
As she became a senior in college, you would have been a sophomore.
Right.
So you still didn't have a whole lot of interactions.
No, except that she was in charge of the choir, the novitiate choir, and I was like her assistant. So we would run off music, we would prepare music and run it off on the, very different machinery than we have now, ditto machines.
The ditto machine.
We had to put the music onto these interesting, I can't remember how we did it. It seems to me it was a punching kind of thing. But anyway, it was quite a task to put music on paper and run it off. We did a lot of that. And then at choir practice, she would take charge of the choir. And then each of us took turns. In fact, she taught me the organ. She was one of my first teachers on the organ because she played, and then when she was preparing to go out on mission, I was being trained to take over playing the organ for Mass on every day, chapel.
Were you allowed to room together?
To do what?
To room together.
No. We were assigned roommates, and we had no input into that.
No. Okay. So you weren't on any other clubs, or you wouldn't have been in the same classes, so
no.
So it was the choir.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a favorite story or a favorite memory about your sister's time at Mercy College? Perhaps one that she told you about.
Well, I have one. I don't know if she'd want me to tell this, but I will because it's a little bit funny. She was at Mercy College. I don't know if you knew the building very well, but there was a top floor. The fourth floor was like a tower. It wasn't the full length of the building.
The administration building?
In the administration. That was where all of us lived for those first 5 years that we were in the community. And the senior novices tended, or once they made first vows, the junior professors, as it were called, lived up in the tower. And so Canice was coming from her room, and she'd come down the stairs and to the fourth floor, which then was the living space for the professors who taught at the college. And she was rushing to get to class, and Sister Mary Lucille, who was the president, happened to be walking past as Canice opened the door very quickly. And unfortunately, the door hit Sister Lucille and broke her arm. So that was a rather unfortunate experience. We could laugh about it years later, but it wasn't very funny at the time.
No. Did she get in trouble for it?
Well, they weren't very happy with her. I think so. I'm sure they had a few words for her. Yes.
How do you think Sister Canice connected on a personal level to the mission of the Sisters of Mercy? Was she ever involved with the University of Detroit and the merger, the University of Detroit?
Yes, she was on the board.
She was on the board
of Mercy College as we were going into the process with U of D. And then she continued to be on the board as they joined together.
Okay. So
she was very involved.
So how do you think she connected on a personal level with the mission of both Mercy College and then the University of Detroit Mercy?
Well, I think very well. It was a struggle. It was difficult to know at that time what was best. Some of us were not too happy about it. Others were very, very happy. Some had concerns that we'd sort of be swallowed up since we were so much smaller than U of D. She was living in Washington, D.C. and came in for board meetings at that time, and usually stayed with me and another sister who was my roommate. And there were also a third sister who lived with us. We had adjoining apartments, so those two sisters, Sister Christian Kuntz, who taught English, and Dolores Naradka, who taught psychology. I was in campus ministry, so I wasn't as conscious of and aware of the things going on at the academic or in the discussions among faculty. But they were very much aware of faculties, and you probably know how faculty can be. They sometimes can be quite challenging to administration and
territorial.
Yes. And so unfortunately, every time she stayed with us, she would be coming in for a board meeting. So both of my two sisters that I was living with, Kristen and Dolores, would really lay it on pretty heavy on Canice. I don't know why she continued staying with us, because sometimes it got a little bit. And as a sister on the board, you're one person among how many, 20, 30 people. So you can give your input, but you certainly don't control the discussion. And then she could never tell us what of course had gone on in the meetings. That was confidential. So those were interesting visits that she spent with us. Many times we tried to change the conversation. But she was definitely working hard herself. She wanted it to work. She wanted it to be good for the Sisters of Mercy. She wanted it to be good for the Jesuits. So she worked very hard to make that happen, and I think they succeeded very well.
Do you have any idea how she did that?
I think her
behind the scenes,
her approach to anything would be to study anything that they sent out. She would study it very carefully. She was a linguist, so language was very important to her. Choice of words was very important to her. That's been a contribution that she made to the community over many, many years, that she was asked to take notes at different meetings and work on language before we came up with the final draft of any particular statements for the community. So I'm sure she did the same for the board meetings, and worked hard to make sure that the spirit of mercy and the mission of the Mercy community was very much incorporated into any documents that they came up with.
Okay, we've heard about Sister Canice's works with Cristo Rey and the Mercy Education Project. Do you have anything you can add that's... and the water, appearing before the Detroit Water Board Commission to talk about the water issues. Is there anything that you can add that we don't know about those things?
Well, I think when she came back from Washington, D.C. to begin work on Mercy Education Project, one of the things she did, she and two other sisters, decided to move into a very poor area of Detroit, down on the east side. It's extremely poor, and they've lived in that area for 22 years, purposely choosing to live among the poor. It was very important to them, as a number of our other sisters have done and are still doing, because they wanted to live among the poor. They wanted to live in the city so they could vote in the city, so they could perhaps help to be a voice for people who may not have that voice at council meetings and other things. And they've done a lot of that. The Detroit Water Board is a very good example of it. So that was important to her, and it grew out of our community's decision, first of all, with Mercy College, to stay in the city of Detroit. We became Mercy College of Detroit. That was added on. It was not the original name of the college. It was just Mercy College. But we became Mercy College of Detroit because that was so important to us. And so it was important to them to live among the poor. They got to know their neighbors. The neighborhood looks quite bad. It's really common of many neighborhoods where you have several very nice homes and then you have a burned out home, or you might have 2 or 3 burned out homes on the same block. They got to know their neighbors. Canice helped to form a block club among the neighbors, which was helped, for safety for all of them. They were concerned that it would be a safe neighborhood for the children, especially. So I think just their very choice of living there was important, an important part of their spirituality and belief in the mission of the Sisters of Mercy. Belonging to St. Charles Parish was very important to them. If you go to St. Charles, one of the sisters of the 3 who first lived together has moved up north and is doing other ministry. Sister Mary Ellen Howard is the sister she lived with them since Sister Bonnie moved up north. And both of them have sung in the choir. Sister Mary Ellen is still singing in the choir at St. Charles. If you were to go there on a Sunday morning, you would see the diversity of that parish. And it's very diverse, but it's probably primarily African American. It's very gospel oriented in terms of the music. The Capuchins staff the parish, and they are wonderful, wonderful priests. They call themselves brothers, which I think is interesting. The pastor now is Brother Ray. They don't go by father, which I love. I think, yes, we are brothers and sisters. And the people act that way. The Capuchins also, of course, run the Capuchin Soup Kitchen. The pastor, Brother Ray, presently the pastor is also, in addition to being in charge of a whole parish, he's also director of a bakery, which they run and staff with men who have been in recovery from alcohol or drugs. And it helps them to get jobs and to learn a trade.
To have experience.
Yes.
Yes.
And they provide wonderful baked goods. And actually they serve them after Mass alone. They serve a whole meal after Mass every Sunday because there's so many people in the neighborhood who are probably really stretching money to try to pay for basic needs. So that's also a very important part of, that was an important part of her spirituality. St. Charles, living in the city, being part of the gospel choir, being very involved in the parish. Does that answer your question?
Yes, answer my question. You had also mentioned one time that she had lived in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what she did there and how long she stayed?
I believe she was there 7 or 8 years, and she lived there. She and another sister started a group, I believe it was called Community Creativity. And most of their work was away from Washington. That was their headquarters. But they traveled all over the country, really, facilitating meetings for religious communities, both men and women's religious communities. Primarily, they probably also did this for some lay groups as well, possibly some schools or parishes, but it was primarily work with religious communities. Using her gifts, she had a wonderful gift of leadership, and she was, as I've mentioned, she had a wonderful vocabulary, and as a linguist, a wonderful command of English. She was a good writer. She worked hard at her writing. It didn't come easily. She labored to write, and she was a perfectionist, so she wouldn't just write something. She wrote it many times before she was satisfied with it, and probably wasn't completely satisfied with it. So that was a wonderful skill to have in terms of working with communities who were perhaps drafting important documents that would be published about their own mission or critical concerns of that particular community at a given time. So she did that for 7 or 8 years, and it did it very well.
And you had mentioned that her work. That work is continuing on.
I believe it is still continuing on. One of the sisters that she worked with, I believe, is still doing that work.
Our last question is there anything that you want to tell us about Sister Canice that we haven't really asked?
I wanted to mention also, in terms of her spirituality, that over the last few years she has become vegetarian. And that was also out of an awareness of some of the things that Pope Francis, for instance, has been emphasizing: care of the earth and care of the resources of the earth and sharing those resources. I'm not a vegetarian. I actually don't like a lot of vegetables, but I really admire. And I have to say that I do try not to eat beef because it takes so much land and so much water and so much grain to feed beef. And that grain can be used to feed so many more thousands of people. So I think with all of our Burger Kings and McDonald's on every corner, everywhere in the country and other countries, we are consuming so much beef, and I don't think we give a lot of thought to the fact of the relationship between that and the numbers, the thousands, the millions perhaps of people throughout the world who don't have enough grain to eat. They just don't have enough food, period. That's also a way of using less water if you don't raise as many cattle. So that was her primary purpose in doing so. So that was an important part of her spirituality. She also, over the last 10 years, she and a few other sisters would give workshops on called Awakening the Dreamer. And it was that whole concept of trying to bring us to an awareness of what we do with our resources in the world and how that affects those who have fewer resources.
Are they still giving those
Oh yes,
workshops?
and it's an international group that are doing this. They're giving them all over.
It's done here in Michigan?
Oh yes, Canice gave several workshops in Farmington. She gave some that she was going to try and have one here on campus. I don't remember if she actually did or not. She would work with campus ministry groups, again, religious communities, parishes, whoever was willing and wanted to have such a workshop. Usually ran, sometimes it was one day, sometimes like a weekend.
Well, maybe the Pope heard her speak.
Possibly.
I heard about this. Do you have anything else?
I don't think so. Nothing comes to mind at the moment.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in.
You're
We really
very welcome.
appreciate it.